There are games that disappear for a while, and then there are games that never really leave the conversation at all. I think Dante's Inferno belongs to the second category. I mean, the game was released in 2010, 16 years ago. It was EA's bold attempt to stay directly into the same space occupied by God of War, but instead of the Greek mythology, it pulled from something far older, heavier, more structurally symbolic as well. Dante Alighieri's Inferno. The result was a fast, brutal action game that reimagined the 9 circles of hell as fully playable environments, each one more surreal and disturbing than the last. And even though it only got a single main entry, it never fully faded away ever since. See, over the years, it has slowly built a kind of cult legacy. Not necessarily as a perfect game, but as a concept that always felt like it had more potential than the original execution could ever fully realize. And that's why in modern gaming discussions, the idea of a Dante's Inferno remake keeps resurfacing once every while. Not confirmed, of course, not officially announced by EA or any other studio tied to the IP, but persistent enough the fans continue to bring it up whenever conversations about remakes, revivals, or forgotten action franchises sort of come back around. And honestly, it does make actually a lot of sense. Because Dante's Inferno was never a small idea. It was ambitious right from the start. Here's the thing, the original game followed Dante as a crusader who returns home after war only to find his life destroyed and his love, Beatrice, dragged into the depths of hell. So from there, the journey becomes a descent through the 9 circles of hell, each representing a different form of sin, punishment, and psychological torment. I mean, that simply is probably one of the greatest backdrops in a video game ever reimagined. It wasn't just about fighting the demons, it was about moving deeper in a moral collapse, while the world itself became more distorted around the player itself. That structure alone was already perfect for modern reinterpretation, and that's where the idea of a remake becomes interesting. Because if you look at what modern technology and design philosophy could do today, Dante's Inferno is just one of those games that feels almost designed for a second chance. That's right, the original already had strong visual identity back then. Each circle of hell had its own atmosphere, its own enemy, design language, and its own environmental storytelling as well. But hardware limitations at the time meant those ideas were often simplified or compressed into linear action spaces rather than fully immersive worlds and spaces. So a modern remake would not have that restriction. Each circle per se could become a fully realized biome of psychological horror and mythological reinterpretation. Limbo could just feel like a faded, lifeless expanse now where nothing fully exists. Lost could become a shifting, distorted environment built around motion and stability. Gluttony could feel physically overwhelming with environments that just seem to consume themselves. Just work your imagination around it. And deeper layers like violence, fraud, and treachery could even become increasingly much more surreal, almost breaking away from traditional level design altogether. The further you go, the less stable reality becomes, and that's the kind of progression modern engines could finally support. And that is also where the remake conversation usually starts to heat up, because fans aren't just asking for better graphics, they're imagining a more complete version of what the original was trying to achieve. Combat is another major piece of that discussion as well. The original game was heavily inspired by God of War at the time, featuring fast melee combat, combo chaining, dual path morality system where Dante could choose between absolving or punishing souls, affecting his progression and abilities. It was ambitious, but it also somewhat limited in depth compared to what modern action games can now achieve. So a remake could expand that system significantly. Instead of simple combo chains, combat could evolve into a more fluid, adaptive system with weightier weapon transitions, enemy behavior variety, and more meaningful interactions between holy and unholy abilities. Dante's Cross could simply become more than just a ranged tool. It could function as a core system for environmental interactions, crowd control, or even traversal within the deeper layers of hell. The choice system itself could also be expanded as well. In the original, absolving or punishing souls mainly affected upgrades and visual progression. So in a modern remake, that system could influence narrative tone, environmental reactions, even enemy types encountered later in the journey. It could also, make each player's descent through hell feel slightly different, depending on how they choose to interact with the world itself. And then, there's also the narrative side, which is arguably where a remake could make the biggest impact. The original adaptation took inspiration from Dante's library work, but reinterpreted heavily through a more action-oriented lens. A modern version could choose to lean further into the psychological and symbolic nature of the source material, while still maintaining the accessibility of a character-driven action game. That balance is important, because the strength of Dante's Inferno was never just its gameplay, it was the idea of reality walking through a structured interpretation of sin and punishment, where each layer of hell reflects something about humanity itself. That concept, you see, still holds up extremely well today. In fact, it might hold up even better now, in an era where more games are willing to explore heavier emotional philosophical themes in video games. That's part of why the remake conversation keeps coming back. EA has not officially announced a remake, and there is no confirmed development timeline or studio attached to the project. However, the original game continues to be referenced, and discussions about dormant IPs that could benefit from modern revival, especially as the industry continues to lean heavily into remakes of early 2010 action games, and Dante's Inferno sits in a very specific category of those games. It's not forgotten, not irrelevant, just unfinished in a way that fans still feel it. So, visually, a modern remake would also have the potential to become something far more cinematic than the original could ever even achieve. Modern lighting systems, particle effects, environmental simulations, all that could turn each circle of hell into a fully dynamic experience. Whatever we're imagining right now, that kind of presentation would elevate the original concept significantly. But even beyond visuals and mechanics, what makes this idea compelling is just the atmosphere. Dante's Inferno was always at its strongest when it leaned into discomfort. Not cheap horror, but existential weight. The feeling of descending further into something you are not even meant to fully understand. The idea that every step forward is also a step away from something human. And that emotional tone is what a remake would need to preserve above everything else. Because without it, the game becomes just another action title with mythological enemies. With it, it becomes something more memorable, heavier, something that stays with players after they stop playing. And that is why the idea of a remake continues to persist in fan discussions, even without official confirmation. It's not just nostalgia for a 2010 action game, it's recognition that the core concept itself still has untapped potential. A descent into hell structured as a modern action experience with deeper systems, richer environments, more emotionally grounded storytelling. That idea doesn't feel outdated. If anything, it feels like something the industry is now better equipped to finally do justice to. And if Dante's Inferno ever returns in remake form, it will certainly not just be a visual upgrade of an older game, it would, without a doubt, be a second attempt at fully realizing one of gaming's most ambitious interpretations of literature, morality, and dissent, finally built with the tools capable of bringing hell to life the way it was actually always imagined.